With the Book of Boba Fett Episode 3 releasing, we finally get to see the story of how Boba Fett became a member of a remote Tusken tribe and learned their ways and traditions. Boba became a very strong advocate for them and stood up for the tribe when the Pikes arrived on Tatooine after Jabba's death. But what do the Tuskens look like under the mask? Well, we've only been shown a few times so far, and I'm going to show you all of them. So make sure you subscribe and let's break it down. So before we see what the Tuskens look like under the mask, it's very important to understand how their species came to be and what shaped their very dark evolutionary path to lead them to where they are now. The Tuskens are actually one of the most recent species to evolve in the galaxy. Most species evolved many thousands of years before the formation of the Galactic Republic, but the Tuskens, and also the Jawas for that matter, are the new kids on the block. And you're about to see the very dark reason why that is in just a bit. Tatooine began as a lush tropical world where its twin suns warmed a vast ocean and thick forests. The primary species who inhabited the planet were known as the Kuumga, and they were extremely advanced for their time, building large sprawling cities and even having the technology required to colonize nearby planets. The elders of the Kuumga, however, were deeply opposed to leaving their world and touching the rest of the galaxy, as they feared it would only bring pain and destruction upon them. Sadly, these elders were correct. Their activities in the region attracted a horrifying amphibious species known as the Rakata to their world, who were touched by the dark side of the Force. The Rakata managed to rise to become the apex predator species of the galaxy in these early times because of their ability to use the Force in places where many others could not. They had Force-powered hyperdrives and weapons, allowing them to expand their brutal empire to anywhere they deemed necessary. As was pretty typical for the Rakata, once they discovered Tatooine, they immediately enslaved the population and killed many of its most skilled warriors. The Kuumga were slaughtered at every turn and their cities were reduced to mere piles of scrap metal. On top of all of this, some of them were taken away by the Rakatans to be used as slave laborers in the construction of the Starforge, which was a devastating automated shipyard intended to create the most monstrous fleet of all time. The Kuumga, though, could only take so much of this barbaric treatment before they stood up and rebelled against their Rakatan occupiers. They fought back and broke free from their chains, actually managing to defeat the Rakata in a shocking upset, driving them off of their world. This was a major and shocking victory to the surrounding systems, but it would not last long. The Rakata soon returned and responded harshly to the Kuumga's rebellion, choosing to do the unthinkable. The Rakata turned their warships onto the planet Tatooine itself, bombarding it from orbit and completely boiling away its vast oceans, fusing the ground into silicon. At this point, it was turned into a planet of glass, much like Mandalore is said to be in the current timeline after Moff Gideon's purges. That is, though, still just a dark rumor spreading among the Mandalorians at this point, but we'll find out about that very soon. So now that the planet was a horrid wasteland, the Kuumga were forced to flee into the dark caves of the planet to survive, living off of the remaining underground water supply and small creatures. They would not emerge from the darkness for thousands of years to come. While the Kuumga lived underground in solitude and exile over thousands of years, the glass above ground down and degraded into sand. Tatooine was now the endless hellscape that we know today. Over these millennia underground, the Kuumga evolved and then split into two separate species. These were the Tuskens and the Jawas. The Jawas evolved into smaller and weaker rat-like bodies with very large eyes adapted to the darkness, while the Tuskens remained closer to their ancestors, the Kuumga, but still quite different. The Tuskens became primitive and superstitious, telling legends about the dark demons who rained down fire over their world. Although they didn't know it, this Tusken legend was actually true, and was the story of what happened to their ancestors, the Kuumga. When the Tuskens and Jawas eventually emerged from their millennia of isolation, they quickly found that their planet was a harsh wasteland. The vast oceans and dense rainforests that their ancestors told myths and fables about were nowhere to be seen. In fact, it was the complete opposite, a desolate hellscape with rolling sand dunes as far as the eye could see. This forced both of the new species to come up with ways to deal with the suns and allow themselves to scavenge for food on the surface. Both quickly turned to cloth robes and outerwear to protect their bodies from the scorching twin suns. And because of the superstitious nature of the Tusken Raiders, the cloth became a sort of a savior to them. Without it, they wouldn't have been able to survive out on the surface of this new Tatooine. This gave their masks and clothing a status of deep respect. The punishment for removing your mask or taking it off of another Tusken was, well, very severe. I'll cover that more later in the video, but it was seen as deeply dishonorable to your tribe if you were caught without your mask on. Even if you simply took the mask off of your opponent in a battle, that could likely be punished very, very harshly. At this point, the two species engaged in vicious warfare against each other, and the fact that they descended from the same species was lost to both of their histories. They had never seen each other's faces since the days of the Kuumga, and neither have we, the viewers. So what do they look like? Well, as for the Tusken Raiders, we've had about 2 or 3 views at their true appearance, and let me warn you, it's probably not what you expected. So the first comes from the old Star Wars Galaxy trading cards, where we see a lone Tusken with a gaffy stick on his back, as well as him wielding a bloodied knife. This tells us that he's just come off of a violent attack, most likely as a bounty hunter, which is the profession that this man took. You can certainly see that most of the similarities to the Kuumga species have long been bred out and evolved, making him look closer to a human. Now next up we get a look at a Tusken Raider from the Star Wars Republic comics, where Anakin has a horrific vision traumatizing him and showing him some of his worst memories. Included in this is the slaughter of his mother at the hands of the Tusken Raiders from Attack of the Clones, where he holds her in his arms but is surrounded by a group of them with red eyes. He then sees one single Tusken Raider with his mask peeling off, only to reveal half of his ghastly face. Inside we can see something with a resemblance to the Kumunga. Although the comic does say that since this is a vision in Anakin's mind, he could be purposely imagining them with more horrifying and monstrous features, since that's exactly what he considers them to be, monsters. After he wakes up from this vision, he is then confronted by Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, who felt the strong disturbance in the Force that it caused, and he even says that it was so violent and so strong that it could even be felt on Coruscant. So it's clear that this is a pain-fueled Force vision, which as Yoda says is always in motion and not necessarily correct. I'd say the parts around the mouth are certainly exaggerated to look more demon-like, since Anakin obviously has a major hatred for them. Now after this we get a very interesting tribe of Tusken Raiders known as the Grave Tuskens. The Grave Tuskens were a tribe that acted as a mercenary swoop gang and had no problem showing their faces off to anyone they came across. They happily flaunted their faces to anyone who would look and sported grey skin with dark eyes. They also had features similar to a gopher, which is probably how their true native name of the Gorfa came about. Somewhere in the history of Galactic Basic, the word for gopher-like creatures was applied to this species and eventually morphed into the word Gorfa. As you can probably guess, this complete disregard for traditional face coverings and other Tusken customs was not typical of any other Tusken tribe and was deeply frowned upon by the others. The traditional law of the Tuskens stated that the Sand People should not show their skin under any circumstances. If caught doing so, they would either immediately be exiled from the tribe or beaten to death, whichever was easier. They were also trained in the use of Wookiee bowcasters, which is really cool, although they had to be slightly modified down to their size. They then put the Wookiee bowcasters to use by plundering ancient artifacts from the tombs of both Light and Dark Jedi, which is actually how they got their name, for literally being grave robbers. The Grave Tuskens. And if we do get a whole lot more flashbacks with the Tuskens, maybe Boba does go around uniting all of the tribes, including the Grave Tuskens, and maybe we'll get a glimpse at their face. The Tuskens would certainly be very useful in the present timeline as part of his crime family as well, especially with how big the theme of water has been through the show, and they keep repeating the word water, and that Tatooine once had water on its oceans. So I think it's going to play a major part in some way, which would have to include the Tuskens. It might even have to include the Jawas, so maybe the Jawas join up in Boba's new criminal empire. Either way, the Tuskens are going to have a very important role to play, whether we know it or not just yet. He could use as many men as he could get, so maybe he should go around to the other tribes. But tell me down in the comments if you think the Tuskens should take their masks off, or if you think some things in Star Wars are simply better left with mystery and intrigue. But either way, that is the full history of the Tusken Raiders and why they never took their masks off. I hope you enjoyed seeing those small little sneak peeks from behind the Tusken masks from Star Wars history, and maybe we'll get some more information about their traditions and customs in the Book of Boba Fett Episode 4 on Disney Plus next week. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel for a whole lot more content on the Book of Boba Fett and Star Wars lore. Thanks so much for watching, really hope you enjoyed the video. Cheers guys, hope to see you in the next one.